function parameters. So a parameter is a value that we pass to the function so that it can incorporate that into the code that's built into the function. So if we take a look at mathrandom, it doesn't require parameters, it doesn't have any value or a word or a placeholder inside the parentheses. So no matter when we run it, it's just going to give us the value 0 up to 1, not including 1. So built-in replace, it has two parameters, the item to look for and the item to replace it with, or values to look for and replace. Sometimes parameters are required, other times they're optional. So in the case of mathrandom, not required, we don't have to pass anything. In the case of replace, these would be required, otherwise it will not know what to replace in the variable that we're passing to it. So if we take a look at this next example here, if we don't put any kind of value in here, it's going to have some default behavior. Again, you're going to have to look at the specs on the functions. If we take a look at join and see what it says method creates a new string by concatenating all the elements in an array separated by commas or a specific separator. If the array only has one item, the item will be returned without using the separator. So if we look at the syntax, it's asking for the separator. So this is how to read this. It's assuming an array, and then the method is join in the round parentheses, and then it wants you to tell it how to separate them. So it says separator is optional, and it specifies a string to separate adjacent items in the array. So if omitted, the array elements are automatically separated with a comma. If the separator is an empty string, all elements are joined without any characters between them. So if we take a look at this here, here's the array. Here's what it looks like when we say space for join. Here's what it looks like when we don't do anything. It just puts a comma in between each value. So scope and conflicts. So scope is important when we're talking about functions. When we make a function, anything that's defined inside the function are using their own scope. So scope, if we take a look at what MDN defines as scope, it's really the context of where that word or variable or function is written or expressed. So if a variable or some other statement is not in the current scope, we can't use it. And that's where we'll start to see some errors where you might try and run a function or reference a variable that's defined inside a function, and it might say that that variable is undefined because it's protected, it's inside, it's locally scoped to the function. However, scopes can be layered, there's hierarchies to it, so that items that have a child scope have access to the parent, but not in reverse. So if I define a variable inside of a function, it's not accessible from outside. But if I define a variable outside the function, I can access it from within. So the top level outside of all your functions is called global scope. It means anything can access that element. So values defined in global are accessible anywhere, including inside a function. So the main reasons these are set this way is because of security and sometimes just the way we organize our files. So in some instances we don't want variables to be accessed willy-nilly from anywhere. So when we open ourselves up to doing that, we can start to have some problems because now things start to conflict and you might get some unexpected results, or there could be some malicious code that's written to take advantage of that. So here's an example. So we have this HTML, and we're linking to two different JavaScripts, first.js and second.js, and then we tell it to run the greeting function here. So if we look at first.js, it says let name equal Chris, function greeting, alert, hello, Chris, welcome to our company. And then second says company name is going to be Zaptec, and then we call another function called greeting. So the alert says our company is called name. So both functions want to use the greeting function, but we can only ever access first.js's greeting, and the second one is ignored because of scope. So not only are we kind of declaring the same variables, we're also declaring the same function inside of each of these different JavaScript files. So what will happen is we're going to get an error. So we can take a look at a live example here. So it says, hello Chris, welcome to our company. Let's view the inspect. And second.js is complaining. It says identifier name has already been declared. So that's where we're getting that overlap and conflict. So when that happens, we need to address that issue by changing the names of the functions, changing the names of the variables, or possibly combining them into one function that does everything we need. So we might have employee name, and then we might have company name, and they get all put into one greeting function. So now we'll take a look at this analogy here. So keeping parts of the code locked away in functions is going to help us avoid some of these overlaps with different files. So the analogy here is like a zoo. So we have all these different animals in separate enclosures, and they only have access to things inside of their enclosure. So same thing would be with our function scope. If animals were to be able to get into other enclosures, we'd have problems. We'd have conflict. So tiger might eat the penguins, the cheetah might eat the zebra, who knows. So it would be wise to think about this analogy now. So each of the enclosures is a function, and the variables are inside. So we can only access the water for the penguins from that function. We can only access the food for the other types of animals from their enclosures. So the zookeeper is like the global scope here, and they have access to everything. So anything outside or inside the functions to take care of those animals. So next we'll take a look at some activities on functions and scope.